Halo David.
Hello, makasih, Pak Ruli. Thank you, everybody. And
Yeah.
selamat pagi. I'm going to use Bahasa English for my presentation. So Ruli,
No worries.
if you have the need to translate, please jump in, okay?
Yep, sure. Okay, David, time is yours.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, so first of all, it was a fantastic trip that we had for 3-4 days in Vietnam, touring the super-intensive round tank farms. Thanks again to Benchmark Indonesia, not Benchmark, but Skretting Indonesia, Skretting Vietnam, Minapoli, Tekisa, everyone involved for putting this together. It was by far the largest group I have ever toured the farms with, but it was a great opportunity to see the latest technologies and to network. So thanks again for making this opportunity possible. What I would like to do today, since I have 30-40 minutes, is to cover what I consider the two most important topics of this Generation 4 round tank model. And that would be water management and the multi-phase systems or transfers. And this model began like 5 years ago in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. And the reason why I think it's significant that we discuss how this model came about in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam is because, for me, it's really the worst case scenario for shrimp farming because of the water quality. I mean, compared to Indonesia, the water quality in the Mekong Delta, it's like day and night. And the fact that today Vietnam can produce up to 40% of their total Vannamei production from this model under conditions that are really much poorer than Di Pasena or Lamphun or Bangyewangi is amazing. And that goes to show that crises drives technology. And this is what we want to understand about this Vietnam model. So a quick review, when I say Generation 4, Indonesia is Generation 3, where they have lined ponds about 0.2, 0.5 hectare, using fast growth genetics, 2 to 3 kilos per square meter, whereas the Generation 4 model in Vietnam has a higher stocking density. They do multi-phase, small round tanks, stocking densities, pond sizes 500 to 1,200 square meters, fast growth genetics, and we're talking up to 8 kilos per square meter per crop. So this is the model that we're going to discuss today. And when people ask me what the driver is for this Generation 4 round tank model, it is to control primarily EHP, because EHP is the #1 challenge in Southeast Asia, India, Vietnam, Thailand, not so much Indonesia yet. And the second reason would be profitability, because, contrary to many people's beliefs, these round tank systems can be highly profitable as far as very predictable. And the trend, as we have seen over the years, is to go for smaller and smaller grow out areas. Whereas in the old days, we used to produce shrimp in half-hectare ponds. Over time, the ponds get smaller and smaller to where now they're only 500 to 800 square meter tanks. And this is because the smaller the tank and the rounder the tank, the easier it is to remove the waste, which is part of the key component in controlling diseases, is to control the waste. Indonesia, I would say, is the #2 country behind Vietnam in implementing this round tank technology farm. However, the management of these round tank farms is still not near to how the Vietnamese manage their round tank farms. And one thing that I learned when I was in Vietnam a few weeks ago is that the Vietnamese say that the EHP spores, microsporidian spores, they're sticky and they attach to the biofloc and other substrate. And become ingested by the shrimp. And so a pure bioflux system is no longer the accepted practice in Vietnam. They go more for the low turbidity, efficient cleaning of the tanks to stay ahead of the EHP spores, because there was a positive correlation between the buildup of organic matter and sediments and the concentration of EHP spores. And so now I understand fully why they take so much effort to really polish that water, to reduce their turbidity, to enable them to control the diseases, as well as to achieve high biomass. So this is sort of a trend that Vietnam has been moving towards in the last few years. Before, they were no different than Indonesia. Vietnam had Generation 3 lined ponds, traditional green water, then they moved to a biofloc. And then today they've switched to the smaller round tanks. They've gone through the high exchange model a couple years ago. And now when we were there recently, we saw that they go for the lower exchange, and they're starting to do more recycling of their mature water. And I will explain this further in this presentation. So this is a slide from Skretting, Vietnam, on the steps taken to settle and treat the water and filter as well. What surprised me is that they filter the water between reservoirs. So here's a version in English where they bring in water from the estuary or Mekong Delta into settling reservoirs. And then the water goes into a series of partitioned ponds. The water gets filtered first, and then with potassium permanganate, the water settles quickly. And then they filter that water to another pond for chlorine treatment. And they have a couple of ponds of this to rotate between ready water and chlorine, filtered again into the ready water reservoir. And I want to emphasize that they are measuring turbidity in the water at this stage before they filter it and it goes to the grow-out pond. And then from the grow-out pond, they discharge the siphon water to a sludge reservoir, and the effluent water from normal exchange goes back into another reservoir. Okay, so here is what I was talking about when they measure turbidity. They use this instrument called, turbidity meter that measures nephelometric turbidity units, or NTU. So that's what they use at this step right here before they send the water to the round tank pond. So this goes to show how the effort they take to try to make sure that the water turbidity going into the grow-out pond is as low as possible. They actually measure turbidity units. This is the first farm that we visited with the group. This is the layout of the entire farm, and you can see clearly how the proportion between reservoir, water storage, and treatment compared to grow-out area, which is here, is not even close to being equal. There's a much more greater area dedicated to water settling and treatment than for grow-out. But it pays because of the amount of biomass produced in the smaller percentage of the farm offsets the land area that's dedicated for water treatment. So the water comes out clear, and here's a photo of some of the filter bags that they use to filter the water between the different reservoirs. This is another farm that we visited. This farm pumps water from the grow-out pond from a siphon pump. So the pump turns on every half an hour to an hour, and it removes the accumulated sludge and waste near the center drain into this box that collects the sludge water, and then the solids are captured in this net so they can see how much molts and dead shrimp come out, and they can monitor the health of the animals. And then the water continues to a series of biogas chambers before it overflows into a set of 2 sludge ponds. So this water from this sludge pond overflows into the next sludge pond before it's discharged. So they do take efforts not only in treating the water, but they take efforts in treating the discharge water as well. So if you were to compare Indonesia with Vietnam, they take 7 to 10 days to treat the water coming from the estuary to the settling reservoirs, to potassium permanganate, chlorine, and then ready to use. In Indonesia, you have the luxury of having fewer steps. So you can have clean oceanic water, treatment with chlorine, prepare the ready water for exchange. So you have that advantage over Vietnam. There's another photo of a farm that I was able to visit that shows you the area dedicated to water treatment, water filtration and treatment for just 2 round tanks. But these 2 round tanks can produce 8 kilos per square meter. They've reached or surpassed 8 kilos per square meter for the last 5 cycles. And so they're highly efficient in the management of the round tanks, but the key is to have good quality water, low turbidity water. Another surprise to me when I visited some more farms is that some farms were implementing these, what I call filter raceways, where they would receive water from a round tank that would go from one end of the raceway to the other end. And this filter mesh would trap the suspended waste or solids. And as the water would pass from that one chamber to the next, more solids would be removed. And over a course of 24 hours or 22 hours, you would have at least 1 turnover of the tank volume. So you are filtering out the suspended solids as well as removing the waste that sits on the bottom through the regular siphoning. So here is a photo on the left of the water coming out of the round tank, and you can see all the feces and particulate in the water column. And then after, you can see the water is much cleaner coming once it goes through this series of filter chambers. And so you can see the water coming up here just by gravity from the round tank. And as it passes to the other side of this chamber, it gets pumped back into the round tank again, that you will see right here. You can see the water going back into the tank. So this happens 22 hours out of the day, where they're continuously filtering the water. And here's an example of how dirty this mesh gets just over a few hours. And so they clean the mesh once a day. They just lower the water level into a ditch, and then they clean the mesh, and then they put it back again. And so this is how they further polish the water, and it enables them to get another 2 kilos per square meter. This farm here is divided into 2 parts, and they say they recirculate approximately 60% of their effluent water. And so what gets siphoned goes to a discharge pond, and then what gets recirculated goes to this center pond and then filtered further into this reservoir beneath these solar panels. And then the water goes into one of these 2 ponds for chlorination. The other pond is for ready water. And they do use, I guess, technology from this company called Rainan, which has hardware and software that helps to monitor the water quality real time through cloud technology. And so they are implementing, technology along with their round tank culture system. So here is a drone video of this farm. It's the first farm that I've seen that has a complete coverage almost of solar panels. I'm not sure what % of the solar energy they're producing or what the savings is, but it must be a good amount. So here you can see 2 round tanks here. These are about 800 square meters. And in this section, you see 4 round tanks. Okay, this is something that I wanted to mention in that, of course, every farm adds probiotics. They all have their own recipes. In this farm, they use this anaerobic fermentation of 2 pineapples along with molasses and the probiotic EM. They ferment for 1 week, 7 days anaerobically, no aeration. And then they add like 20 liters for each tank every day. So other farms that we visited, they ferment for just 48 hours and they add it to the tanks. But every farm adds probiotics, fermented probiotics to their water. And of course, every farm adds a mineral mix every day to the water just to maintain the proper limit of magnesium, calcium, and potassium alkalinity in the water within the optimal range. Okay, so that's water. Now I would like to discuss about the importance of multi-phase in a grow out. For me, if you're going to do a round tank, small farms, ponds like this, you have to do multi-phase, because by doing direct stocking and harvest, just like a generation 3 pond, you're not going to make money. So the more harvest you do, the more transfers you do, and you shorten that last phase of grow out, the more volume of biomass you make per hectare, and therefore you make more rupiah. And in addition to going multi-phase, you can target larger size shrimp and get a higher value for those shrimp. So in 100 days, you can get about 30 grams shrimp on average using this system. In this particular farm, they were doing 4 phases. Phase 1 here is a nursery, and then they have 6 ponds of 800 square meters each. And they do transfers at about 20 days. And then after 50 days or 30 more days, they'll do a transfer, 10 to 12 grams. And then another 30 days, they'll transfer at 15 to 16 grams to get 40 gram shrimp at the end. Of course, they do partial harvest here. But the point is that if they want to get the large size shrimp, then they try to go for 4 phases. 15 to 20, 25 gram shrimp, okay, you can go for 3 phases. One thing that I should mention is that transfers in Vietnam are not a big deal. They talk about it like it's something that everyone should be able to do because they've been doing it for quite a while now. They have 3 methods that they transfer shrimp that I know of. One is just a regular seine net. The other is a shrimp trap. And the other is transferring using a water pumping system. But before I discuss about the 3 techniques for transfer, I wanted to share the slide by Spreading Vietnam in that, you know, I think it's a very good graph because it shows when the exponential growth of the juveniles begins from day 18, then you can see the animals really start to grow fast. And so that's why the transfer generally occurs between 25 to 30 days when the animals are reaching, I guess, almost the carrying capacity of the nursery, as well as a good transfer size as well. Say between 1 gram and 1.2 grams. And so this is a good graph to know that, you know, when would be the optimal time to transfer animals from phase 1 to phase 2. And in addition, this is sort of a protocol from Spreading Vietnam on the criteria for knowing when to do the transfer, say between the lunar phase, between the molting cycles. And of course, you conduct a health check. You send animals for PCR analysis to make sure that they're disease-free. And you stop feeding the day before you do the transfer. And this is a protocol for the stress test of the juveniles before transfer. In a bucket, 5 minutes, no water, which is amazing. And then you add fresh water for 30 minutes and then seawater for 30 minutes. So if you get 90%, then the animals are strong enough to transfer. So they do have a method to their madness. This is how they transfer. This is the criteria they use to determine if the juveniles are strong enough to transfer. So this is a video of the transfer using a seine net. So they just have a couple guys dragging a net through a little at a time, and then they fill up a basket, usually around 10 kilos per basket. And what's interesting to me is that after he fills up the basket, he dips the basket in the solution. So if you wait a second, it'll be coming up soon. Okay, sorry, it wasn't on this one. Okay, so the next technique is the shrimp trap method. Less handling, takes a bit longer to transfer. You can remove 80% of the shrimp in 3 hours. The trap is left in the water 5 to 10 minutes. You pull out 7 to 10 kilos per set, and you throw some feed on top of the trap to attract the shrimp to go into the trap. So this is a video of the use of the shrimp trap to catch the shrimp a small amount at a time. Okay, I think this is the one where they're dipping the basket into the solution. So he walks the basket and he dips it in, it's called the betamin vitamin dip solution. And they say that it helps to reduce the stress of the animal during the transfer and after the transfer. So it's not like ice or anything, it's just a vitamin betamin dip. And then it gets transferred to the next pond. Okay, the third technique is the water pumping system, where they have a system rigged up where they pump water from a pond continuously through this cone tank. And so as the shrimp are pulled out of the pond, they're weighed and then they're dumped into this, and the water carries the shrimp to the next pond. So the stress is really minimal, like a 1 to 1.5 horsepower pump. This is that dip I mentioned where they have a betamin vitamin dip treatment to reduce stress. I think of the 3 techniques, I like this one the best, but they use all 3, I think readily throughout the country. Okay, for those large farmers in Indonesia who are looking to transform their farm, here's a good example of how it's done in Vietnam. So what they've done here is they have transformed a 260 hectare farm with larger size generation 3 ponds into smaller 1,200 square meter ponds. And what's interesting is you don't see nursery ponds here, they're all the same size. So what they do is these ponds serve as a phase 1 nursery, phase 2, and phase 3. They just transfer animals from one to the next so that they shorten the grow out phase, each of the grow out phases. And so this goes to show that you don't have to do all round tanks. You can do round ponds. The largest size pond would be 1,200 square meters. And so this company is transforming all of its 4 farms, and this is the smallest of the 4, into this round pond or square pond with rounded corner model, because they're better able to control the diseases, the health of the animals, and still get a good harvest. The last farm we visited was this farm up near Kamran Bay. And what's interesting to me is here we are standing here, we're looking at this very big round tank. It's 1,200 square meters, 40 meters in diameter. And what surprised me is this was their nursery pond. And it just so happened they said that this pond was empty, so they decided to stock post larvae in here at a lower stocking density. And then they would transfer to these other round tanks. And so that goes to show that you can use any size pond or tank under 1,200 square meters as a nursery. You just have to know how to transfer. And by doing this multi-phase system, you can gain in biomass per hectare per year to make this model pay for itself, because to do direct stocking is like a crime. You don't want to do direct stocking in round tanks when you can do a multi-phase with very little effort. So for me, I think the direction that Vietnam is heading is the right one. You know, to recycle mature, low turbidity water is something that I think will be the future, the next frontier. And I think that the reason why they're doing it is not out of choice, but out of necessity to really lower the costs and to maximize efficiency and production in the small area. And so, granted, in Indonesia, you don't have to resort to this today. But as I mentioned, you know, if you want to see the future, go to Vietnam, because these are the extremes that Vietnam has to resort to and enable to produce shrimp and be competitive at a global level. So that is my presentation. I hope everyone was able to understand. And thank you very much for your attention.